Hi, my name is Amy. Thank you very much for watching, and let's make some bad financial decisions together. This is for entertainment purposes only, so if you're entertained, please like and subscribe. I would really appreciate that. So today I'd like to talk to you about margin. That was what I was in charge of gathering information for today's pit, and I guess I will leave a link to the recording in the description down below where you can hear everybody's opinion about margin. But here are my thoughts, because the question posed to me was, is it a tool or is it a shovel to dig your own grave? And I do think that a lot of people get into trouble because it's like with a credit card, where when people are new to credit cards and they don't have the financial education, then they say, oh, my credit limit is $10,000. And then they put $10,000 on their credit card and then they don't pay it off every month. And all of a sudden they have 30% interest and it becomes bad and it snowballs. And oh my gosh, this is terrible. It's kind of like that, but with margin, because people try to take out the maximum amount of margin they could possibly take out. And then the market goes down and they're caught flat-footed, and then they get margin called. And then it is margin's fault and not the fact that they took out way too much margin. So then what is enough margin? What is too little? What is too much? Well, there's no such thing as too little. Too little is just I don't have the risk tolerance, or I'm rich enough that I no longer need this leverage. And so it's an optional tool. I think that a lot of people would benefit when they first start out with doing things like, do I have the cash to settle this? So if you have $1,000 of margin, do you have $1,000 of cash? What I wound up doing when I first got into margin was half a paycheck. I can have half a paycheck in my margin, because if it gets in trouble and it goes down, I can use half of my paycheck to pay off the margin. One of the things is that Robinhood doesn't let you adjust your risk profile for your margin buffer. And they only tell you that your margin is in trouble when you have a 6% margin buffer. That is way too aggressive. I cannot tell you what your perfect percentage of buffer is, but 6% is just too much margin being taken out. I have a lot of margin out, but it's mostly because I used it as a margin loan to pay off the short of my condo. So now I no longer have a condo. I'm saving around $500 a month not doing that, especially since I don't have a job. Like, this is fine. We're going to work towards getting this margin taken care of, but it's literally the last priority on the list of all the debt that I need to take care of. This just needs to be maintained. So how does margin even work? Well, you need 100% of your cash to be able to buy into it. And then after that, you have to stay above the margin ratio. So things like GDXY, it has a 25% margin ratio, which means from the time you first bought into it, it could go down until like 75% until it hits the 25%. And then you need to add more capital or to sell the assets to make sure that you have enough collateral in your portfolio. And this is different in every broker. It can actually be different in different accounts depending on how aggressive and your concentration is within your portfolio. So things like XBTY, and for a while there for Misty with me, well, XBTY is at 50%, PLTW is 40%. This means that you can borrow less because it doesn't give you a 4-to-1 ratio for your margin. And then for me, for Misty, for a while it was at 75% margin maintenance. And that is a risk. I had a reasonable amount of margin out with a reasonable margin buffer. And then my Misty went from a 35% margin buffer to the 75% margin buffer, and I didn't adjust the amount of assets I had. And so I went from having more than a 50% margin buffer to a 30% margin buffer, and that was not amazing. Right now I'm at a 38.28% margin buffer, but I was at a 30%, so this is relatively better. So I guess I'm not like bragging or anything, but basically I have too much margin buffer out, so maybe I'm not the overarching expert in this, except I am using a lot of margin. I have not been margin called yet, so that's nice. So one thing you could do is do I have the cash? Do I have an amount? Or the more margin that you have, the more conservative you should be with what you're actually invested in. And I don't think I went over this before, but I think high income ETFs make more sense to use margin than regular swing trades that people used to do. Because, like, if you get into Ulti and it was at $7 and now it's at $5.46, well, if you had margin and it didn't pay a distribution, then you would have to just wait for that to go up enough that you can pay off the margin and the interest. But with Ulti, it's paying an 86% distribution rate or something around there. And so you can use that distribution to pay down your margin. And the way that works is any new money that comes in, whether it's your distribution or you do a transfer into your account, the first thing it pays off is the interest. And the second thing it pays off is the amount of margin that you have. But it's not like it's a personal loan. With a personal loan, if you pay back that amount, it's just paid back. You cannot take it out again. But with margin, you don't have to apply. You can just take out the amount. Like, you can buy into new securities up to the amount that you want your margin to be used. So I have found it easier for me to pick a whole dollar amount and say, for example, $70,000. When I get paid my distributions, the amount goes down, so I'll have like $68,000. So then I'll know that I can buy 1,000 some odd dollars and bring it back to $70,000. And that's just for me to know, like, where is my own limit. Robinhood does let you set a dollar limit, but I would rather do it myself. Also, you don't have to do it as a dollar amount. You can do it as the margin buffer. I've heard maybe you should not have more than 50% of your margin. Like, you should always have at least a 50% margin buffer. For me, in an ideal situation where I didn't need margin, it would be like a 70% margin buffer. But what you can do, if you have a lot of margin out, de-risk your portfolio. So about 1/3 of my portfolio right now is in gold-related high-income ETFs. And then I do have winter and SLTY. So this is at 5% of my portfolio. And SLTY is at like 8%. So I do need to buy more winter. However, when my goal is to have these two at 10% each, so 20% of my portfolio is in an inverse, and then 1/3 of my portfolio is in gold. And in that way, my entire portfolio could go down 50 or 60% and still not get margin called. So I'm taking steps to make my portfolio less risky. I'm also transferring my leverage ETFs into my leverage trust account so that it's in cash. It's a cash account. I don't have to worry about it going down. But one risk that people don't, because margin call is basically the value of your portfolio is less than what the collateral you're required to have. So some brokers, they give you a grace period. Robinhood gives you 3 days to come up with money to make it good before they start selling things, or you can sell your own assets. Interactive Brokers does not have a grace period. They just sell your assets at the worst possible moment. So you don't want to sell anything when the prices are down. You want to only be able to buy more things when the prices are down. So one of the other risks that we don't really talk about is that the rate that we have in these brokers are variable, which means they change over time. So I've been lucky so far. It was at 5.5% interest rate. Right now it's at 5.3% interest rate. But if the federal government raises interest, for example, if we have stagflation and they really just need to increase it so that inflation doesn't go bad, this annual rate could go up to like 15-20%. And so can you get a distribution rate that makes sense for a 20% interest rate? Probably the answer is no. So you want to have basically, could I sell assets to settle my margin if the interest rate gets to be way too much? So at the moment, I could not sell this because I need to have a certain amount of equities in order to pay all of my bills that I have. So right now, this is not an ideal situation for me. I'm just using it as an example because it's the only margin account that I have. So just in general, I cannot recommend to you how much margin you should take out. It depends on what your risk tolerance is, how risky is your portfolio. If you're in a lot of these weekly ETFs that are leveraged and you're already making over 100% distribution, then you should not be taking out a lot of margin because those can have an outsized downturn. Like when there is a downturn in the market, they'll have an outsized loss. So the less margin that you have, the more stable, like you won't get margin called basically. Or at least it was not a guarantee, but you have less chance of it being a margin called. And if you're in 100% like treasury bills, bonds, and gold, then maybe you can take out more margin and you're more comfortable with taking out more margin because the beta on your account is relatively low. So it also depends on the size of your portfolio. I've heard that leverage makes more sense the smaller your account is because it gives you a boost. It's a tool to boost your return that you wouldn't otherwise get. But as you have more and you don't need margin, there's no reason to add that leverage risk to your portfolio. So I think for me, as long as the margin interest rates make sense, I will probably always have at least a little bit of margin, but maybe not to this extent. Also, speaking from personal experience, if you have margin enabled on your account, you can have options collateral, which I think is neat and better than margin. Well, there's pros and cons to each. So I like options collateral because basically you've sold or bought, you used an option and now you have collateral. So while that option is in play, the value of that collateral doesn't go up or down. So if the rest of your portfolio is going way down, it kind of buffers your portfolio value. And you can always roll your option forward so it doesn't get exercised and put back into the pool. One of the drawbacks of that, though, is a lot of these high-income ETFs, they have return of capital and other tax advantages. So basically, all the options that you do, all those premiums are taxed, and there's no tax advantage to that. But if you're in a high-income ETF and it has 100% return of capital, then you don't have to pay taxes on that, or if it's just a percentage return of capital. And so I have chosen for this round to go with using a lot of margin and using high income ETFs with the return of capital instead of doing options collateral. I just wanted to point out that that is something that you could do in a margin account if you want to not really hedge, but make your portfolio value more stable. Anyways, do you like margin? Do you have margin? And I'm going to bring up my let's do memberships. Thank you so much. Motivation Boost, Shane O'Mac, Bill Bryant, Pedro X. Spalding, BGP Automotive, in my opinion, Jetta, and Omega Werewolf X. You all are amazing, and you are helping me make YouTube and YieldMight my full-time gig, and I really do appreciate you. And I will talk to you later. Bye.